My name is Griselda, and I am 26 years old. Life has never handed me anything on a silver platter. I work 2 jobs just to make ends meet, waitressing by day and delivering pizzas by night, while my brother Jake gets everything he wants from our parents. They bought him a house while I can barely afford rent. But everything changed the night my long-lost Uncle Frank ordered pizza. Who knew one delivery would completely transform my life? Before I get into my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. If you have ever felt like the underdog in your family, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Trust me, you will want to hear how I finally turned the tables on my family. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Portland, Oregon with my parents Diana and Robert and my younger brother Jake. From the earliest days, I can remember the favoritism toward Jake was painfully obvious. Every birthday, Jake had elaborate parties with bounce houses, professional entertainers, and custom cakes that must have cost hundreds of dollars. Meanwhile, my birthdays usually consisted of a simple cake from the grocery store and maybe a few friends over for pizza if I was lucky. When I was 10, I won the school science fair with a project on renewable energy. The award ceremony was scheduled on the same day as one of Jake's soccer games. Even though my achievement was announced weeks in advance, my parents chose to attend his game instead. I received my certificate with no family present, while other kids had parents taking photos and beaming with pride. The unequal treatment continued throughout our childhood. When Jake turned 16, our parents surprised him with a brand new car, complete with a giant red bow on top, like those luxury car commercials. I remember standing in the driveway forcing a smile, while inside I was calculating how many more hours I would need to work at my part-time job to afford the used car I had been saving for over the past 2 years. Despite the lack of parental support, I excelled academically. I was consistently on the honor roll, and by my junior year, I was taking several AP classes. I found validation in my achievements that I could not get at home. My teachers recognized my potential, and one in particular, Mrs. Lawson, became a mentor who encouraged me to apply to competitive colleges. The one family member who seemed to truly see me was my Uncle Frank, my father's brother. He would visit a few times a year, and unlike my parents, he would ask about my studies and interests. When I showed him my report cards full of A's, he would beam with genuine pride. "You have got a brilliant mind, Griselda," he would tell me. "You are going to do amazing things someday." Why? Uncle Frank was successful in real estate and always had fascinating stories about his business deals. He never married or had children of his own, and I sometimes wondered if that was why he took such an interest in me. Whatever the reason, I treasured our conversations and the way he made me feel valued. Everything changed when I was 14. Uncle Frank and my father had a massive argument behind closed doors. I could hear their raised voices from my bedroom, though I could not make out the words. When Uncle Frank stormed out that night, he gave me a quick hug and said something I did not understand at the time. "Remember, your worth is not determined by others, Griselda. Stay true to yourself." After that night, Uncle Frank vanished from our lives. Whenever I asked about him, my father would change the subject or say cryptically that Frank made his choices. I tried calling him a few times, but the number I had was disconnected. As the years passed, Uncle Frank became a fading memory, though I often thought about his encouraging words when family life was particularly difficult. By the time I was applying for colleges, I had accepted that I would need to forge my own path. With excellent grades, strong recommendation letters, and well-crafted essays, I was accepted to several good schools, including the State University, with a partial academic scholarship. When I shared the news with my parents, their response was lukewarm at best. "That is nice, honey," my mother said, barely looking up from her magazine. "But you know we cannot afford to help much with tuition." This came as a shock, since they had already promised to pay for Jake's education in full despite his average grades. When I pointed this out, my father's response was swift and dismissive. "Jake has different needs than you. You have always been so independent and resourceful. We know you will figure it out." That night, I cried myself to sleep, but by morning my sadness had hardened into determination. I would succeed despite them, not because of them. I accepted the offer from the state university, applied for every scholarship I could find, took out student loans, and prepared to work while studying. My acceptance letter became my ticket to freedom, a chance to build a life away from the constant reminder that I was somehow less deserving than my brother. The transition to college life was both exhilarating and terrifying. My partial scholarship covered about half of my tuition, but I still needed to pay for the rest, plus books, housing, and living expenses. While most freshmen were enjoying orientation activities and making friends, I was applying for jobs around campus. I landed a position at the university coffee shop, working early mornings before classes and weekend shifts. The manager, a gruff but fair woman named Teresa, was willing to work around my class schedule. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but with careful budgeting, I could just manage to get by without asking my parents for help. During those first few months, I called home every Sunday out of obligation. The conversations invariably turned to Jake, who was still in high school and apparently excelling at everything according to my parents. Jake got scouted by the college baseball team, my mother would gush, or Jake was nominated for prom king, as if these accomplishments were somehow relevant to my life hundreds of miles away. I learned to make appropriate noises of interest while completing homework or planning my budget for the upcoming week. These calls became shorter and less frequent as the semester progressed. Despite working 20 hours a week, I maintained a 3.8 GPA my freshman year. I discovered I had a talent for business and economics courses and declared a major in business administration by the end of my first year. My academic advisor, Dr. Patterson, told me I had potential for a promising corporate career if I continued on this track. The summer after freshman year, I stayed at the university to take additional courses and pick up more hours at the coffee shop. Returning to my parents' house was not an option I seriously considered. Jake had just graduated high school, and my parents were planning an extravagant graduation party that would have made me feel like an unwelcome spectator in my own family's celebration. It was during my sophomore year that I met Amanda in a marketing class. We were paired for a group project, and her outgoing personality complemented my more reserved nature. Amanda came from a loving, supportive family, and initially could not comprehend my family situation. "They really would not help you at all with college?" she asked incredulously when I explained why I worked so many hours. "Even though they are paying for your brother's education?" I shrugged, used to this reality. "They have always been that way. Jake is their priority." Amanda became my closest friend at university. She would invite me to her family's holiday celebrations when going home became too painful, and her parents welcomed me warmly. Through Amanda, I experienced what a supportive family dynamic could look like, which was both comforting and bittersweet. By junior year, I had to increase my work hours to keep up with rising costs. I took a second job as a research assistant in the business department, which paid slightly better than the coffee shop and gave me valuable experience. Between classes, 2 jobs, and studying, I had little time for a social life beyond occasional coffee with Amanda. Dating was out of the question, and I missed many of the typical college experiences my peers took for granted. During my senior year, I learned that Jake had been accepted to an expensive private university across the country. My mother called specifically to share this news, her voice brimming with pride. "Your father and I are so excited. We are helping him with a down payment on an apartment near campus, so he does not have to live in those crowded dorms." The casual way she announced this, knowing I was working 2 jobs just to afford shared student housing, felt like a deliberate slight. I ended the call quickly, claiming a work commitment, and spent the evening applying for post-graduation jobs with renewed determination. I graduated with honors in business administration, walking across the stage to receive my diploma, while Amanda and her family cheered from the audience. My parents attended the ceremony, but left immediately after to prepare for Jake's arrival home from his freshman year. They did not even stay for photos. The economy was in a downturn when I graduated, making the job market especially competitive. Despite my excellent grades and relevant experience, corporate positions were scarce. I sent out dozens of applications each week but received few responses. After 3 months of job hunting while burning through my meager savings, I had to accept reality. I took a waitressing position at a local diner called Sunny Side Up and moved into the smallest, cheapest apartment I could find in a somewhat questionable neighborhood. The final blow came when I learned through a casual comment from my mother that they had just bought Jake a house as a graduation gift, even though he was still 2 years away from completing his degree. "We want to make sure he has a good investment property for his future," she explained. "Real estate in that area is just going to increase in value." I thought about my own student loans now entering repayment and the credit card debt I had accumulated during my job search. The inequity was so stark, it was almost laughable. That night, I allowed myself one evening of tears and self-pity before resolving to push forward. I would build my own success even if it took years of grinding work. I did not need their handouts or approval. My daily routine quickly became a punishing cycle of work and brief rest. I would wake up at 4:30 in the morning to get ready for my shift at Sunny Side Up, which started at 6 and ended at 2 in the afternoon. After a quick break to change clothes and grab a small meal, I would start my evening job delivering pizzas for Papa Giuseppe's from 5 until 11 at night. My tiny studio apartment was in a building with paper-thin walls, where I could hear everything from the couple arguing above me to the aspiring drummer practicing next door. The maintenance issues were endless. The hot water worked sporadically, the air conditioning was non-existent during the sweltering summer months, and I battled a persistent mold problem in the bathroom. But at $600 a month, it was all I could afford while trying to make my student loan payments and keep food on the table. Despite the exhaustion that had become my constant companion, I found small moments of joy. Sunday mornings were sacred, the only time I allowed myself to truly rest. Amanda, who had landed a marketing job at a local firm, would meet me for coffee at a cafe halfway between our apartments. She never judged my circumstances and always listened when I needed to vent. "You will not be delivering pizzas forever," she would reassure me. "You are too smart and too determined. This is just temporary." I wanted to believe her, but as weeks turned into months, my hope began to waver. I continued to apply for office jobs, updating my resume and writing customized cover letters during my few free hours. The rejections piled up, each one citing candidates with more experience or internal hires as the reason. My phone calls with my parents became increasingly strained. They would talk endlessly about Jake's adventures in graduate school, his internship opportunities, the trips they were planning to visit him. When they asked about my life, it felt perfunctory, and I gave them sanitized versions of my reality. Work is fine, the apartment is fine, everything is fine. I could not bear to hear their thinly veiled disappointment if I told them the truth, nor could I stomach what might have been worse, their pity. Jake occasionally visited Portland and would stop by the diner, arriving in the BMW our parents had given him for his 21st birthday. He would leave an exactly 20% tip, never more, and ask about my career plans with an air of condescension that made me want to pour coffee in his lap. "You know, if you need help with your resume, I could look it over," he offered during one visit. "My career counselor at school is really top-notch." I forced a smile. "Thanks, but I am good." The reality of my financial situation was becoming increasingly precarious. Each month, I would sit at my small kitchen table with bills spread out before me, calculating and recalculating how to make ends meet. After rent, utilities, car insurance, gas, student loan payments, and groceries, I had less than $100 left for any unexpected expenses. I had started selling belongings I did not absolutely need. My college textbooks long gone, followed by the nice watch Uncle Frank had given me for my high school graduation, and even my winter coat, which I replaced with a thrift store find. The physical toll of working 17-hour days began to manifest in concrete ways. I developed chronic back pain from being on my feet all day. Dark circles took up permanent residence under my eyes. I caught every cold that came through the diner, my immune system weakened by exhaustion and stress. One particularly bad case of the flu forced me to miss 3 days of work, putting me even further behind financially. The emotional distance between my family and me grew into a chasm. I stopped calling home regularly, and they rarely reached out. My birthday passed with just a text message from my mother and a generic Facebook post from Jake. I told myself I did not care, that I had outgrown the need for their approval or attention, but the hurt lingered nonetheless. On a rainy Thursday evening in November, I was nearing the end of my pizza delivery shift. The weather was miserable, a cold Portland rain that seemed to seep into your bones. My 10-year-old Honda had a leak somewhere in the driver's side door, and my left leg was soaked. I had one last delivery to an address in the West Hills, the affluent section of town, where the homes were large and set far back from the road. I pulled up to a modern-looking house with large windows and a beautifully landscaped yard. The kind of place I would drive by and wonder what it would be like to live somewhere so nice. Balancing the pizza box carefully, I made my way up the slick stone pathway to the covered porch and rang the doorbell. As I waited, water dripped from my hair onto my already damp uniform. I practiced my delivery smile, determined to be professional despite my discomfort. The porch light was dim, and when the door opened, I could only make out the silhouette of a tall man. "Pizza delivery from Papa Giuseppe's," I said, my customer service voice firmly in place. "Thank you," the man replied, stepping into the light to take the box. "How much do I owe you?" I froze, the pizza box still in my hands. The voice was familiar, and as my eyes adjusted to the light, I recognized a face I had not seen in 12 years. "Uncle Frank," I said in disbelief. The man looked at me more closely, confusion giving way to shock. "Griselda, my God, is that you?" We stood there for a moment, both stunned into silence by the improbable encounter. I was suddenly acutely aware of my soaking wet uniform, my disheveled appearance, and the absurdity of our reunion occurring during a pizza delivery. "You are delivering pizzas," he said finally, his voice filled with confusion. Yes, it is my second job," I managed to say, still holding the pizza box between us like a shield. A gust of wind blew rain onto the porch, and I shivered involuntarily. "Please come inside," Uncle Frank said, taking the pizza and stepping back from the doorway. "You are soaking wet." I hesitated. "I have more deliveries." I lied, not wanting him to see me like this, not wanting his pity. "Griselda, please, just for a few minutes. I have not seen you in over a decade." Something in his voice, a genuine concern I had not heard from family in years, made me step through the doorway. Uncle Frank's home was beautiful inside, with high ceilings, modern furnishings, and large windows that would have offered spectacular views during daylight hours. He set the pizza on a kitchen counter and returned with a plush towel. "Here, dry off a bit. Can I get you something warm to drink, coffee, tea?" "I really cannot stay long," I said reluctantly, taking the towel. "My shift ends soon." "Just a few minutes," he insisted. "I will make it worth your while. Clearly, we have a lot to catch up on." While he busied himself in the kitchen, I took in more details of his home. Photos on the walls showed him in various locations around the world, always smiling, often with beautiful architecture in the background. There were certificates and awards framed in his office, visible through an open door. Whatever he had been doing in the years since our family rift, he had obviously been successful. He returned with 2 mugs of tea and guided me to a comfortable sitting area. "So," he said, setting the mugs down on a coffee table, "you are delivering pizzas." I felt a flash of defensiveness. "And waiting tables at a diner in the mornings. I am making ends meet." "And your business degree?" "Your mother mentioned at some point that you were studying business." I was surprised he had any information about me at all. "I graduated with honors, but the job market was tough, and I needed to pay bills while I looked for something in my field." Uncle Frank nodded thoughtfully. "And your parents? They are not helping you." I gave a bitter laugh before I could stop myself. "They are too busy funding Jake's education and buying him a house." Understanding dawned on his face. "I see some things have not changed." I sipped my tea, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, but also feeling a strange relief at being seen. "What happened between you and Dad? One day you were part of our lives, and the next you were gone." Uncle Frank sighed heavily. "Your father and I had a business disagreement that turned personal. We were planning to invest in a property development together. I did all the research, found the property, created the business plan. When I presented it to the investor group, Robert took credit for the entire project and squeezed me out completely." I was shocked, but not entirely surprised. "That sounds like Dad." I confronted him, things got heated, and words were said that could not be taken back. I regret losing touch with you, though. I should have tried harder to stay connected. It would have been difficult. Dad probably would have prevented it anyway. We sat in silence for a moment, the rain pattering against the windows. What do you do now? I asked, genuinely curious about how he had built this life. I am a real estate developer. After that fallout with your father, I moved to Seattle for a few years, built up my own company, then expanded back to Portland about 5 years ago. Business has been good. I nodded, thinking of the irony that Jake was being gifted property while I was sitting with someone who had actually built a successful real estate career. Uncle Frank studied me for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. Griselda, I have a proposition for you. I am looking for someone to train in my business. Someone smart, hardworking, with a business background who understands the value of putting in the effort. Based on what I remember about you and what I am seeing now, you might be a perfect fit. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. You want to hire me? You have not seen me in 12 years. You do not know anything about me now. I know enough, he said simply. I know you graduated with honors while working through college. I know you are working 2 jobs to support yourself rather than taking handouts. And I remember a bright, determined girl who deserved much better than she got from her family. I was suspicious. Nothing in my life had ever come this easily. Why would you do this for me? His expression softened. Perhaps I am trying to make amends for disappearing from your life. Or perhaps I simply recognize talent when I see it. Either way, the offer is genuine. Come work for me, learn the business, and see if it is something you want to pursue. I hesitated, turning the mug in my hands. I would need to give notice at my jobs. Of course, he nodded. Take the weekend to think about it. Here is my card with my personal number. Call me when you decide. As I drove home that night, the rain had stopped, and for the first time in years, I felt something that had become almost foreign to me. Hope. The next morning, I called in sick to the diner, something I never did unless I was physically unable to work. I needed time to think, to process the unexpected encounter with Uncle Frank and his even more unexpected offer. I spent hours researching him online, confirming that he was indeed a successful real estate developer with a legitimate business. Maple Grove Properties had an impressive website showcasing commercial and residential developments across the Pacific Northwest. Articles in business journals mentioned Frank Spencer as an innovative developer known for sustainable building practices and community-minded projects. Everything I found indicated his success was real and his business reputation solid. After my research, I called Amanda to meet for coffee earlier than our usual Sunday gathering. I needed a sounding board, someone who would give me honest feedback. It sounds too good to be true, she said after I explained the situation. But sometimes life does hand out second chances. And honestly, Griselda, you are long overdue for some good luck. What if I am terrible at real estate? What if he regrets hiring me? Amanda gave me a pointed look. What if you are amazing at it? What if this is exactly the opportunity you have been working toward all these years? You have nothing to lose by trying. By Sunday evening, I had made my decision. I called Uncle Frank and accepted his offer. He sounded genuinely pleased and asked me to come to his office the following Monday, giving me a week to give notice at my jobs and prepare for this new chapter. The managers at both the diner and pizza place were surprised by my resignation but wished me well. A few regular customers at Sunny Side Up even gave me cards and small gifts when they heard I was leaving for a professional opportunity. The morning of my first day at Maple Grove Properties, I stood before my mirror barely recognizing myself. Instead of a food-stained uniform, I wore a simple but professional outfit I had carefully selected from a thrift store's business section. I had splurged on a haircut, my first in over a year, and the face looking back at me seemed somehow both older and younger, tired but hopeful. Uncle Frank's office was located in a renovated industrial building in the Pearl District. The space was open and modern with exposed brick walls, large windows, and a dozen or so employees working at sleek desks. Uncle Frank greeted me warmly and introduced me to the team as his new protege, a word that made me both proud and nervous. "This is Teresa, our office manager," he said, introducing me to a woman about my age with a friendly smile. "Welcome aboard," she said, shaking my hand. "Frank has been talking about you all week. I was assigned a desk near Uncle Frank's office and spent the morning filling out employment paperwork and getting oriented to the company's systems. The salary he offered was modest by industry standards but felt like a fortune compared to what I had been making. For the first time in years, I would not have to worry about making rent or choosing between groceries and electricity. That first week was overwhelming. I absorbed information like a sponge, learning about property valuations, market analysis, zoning regulations, and financing options. Uncle Frank was a demanding mentor, expecting me to learn quickly and think on my feet, but he was also patient and encouraging when I struggled. The real estate business is all about relationships and seeing potential where others do not, he explained during one of our mentoring sessions. Anyone can look up property values online. What sets successful developers apart is vision and the ability to build trust with clients and partners. I continued working at the diner for 2 weeks, using the extra money to build a small emergency fund before committing fully to my new role at Maple Grove. The physical relief of not working 17-hour days was immediate. Colors seemed brighter, food tasted better, and I found myself smiling more easily. As I learned more about the business, Uncle Frank began taking me to property showings and meetings with clients. I observed how he interacted the questions he asked, the way he highlighted different features for different clients based on their interests and needs. He encouraged me to take notes and ask questions during our debriefs afterward. "You have good instincts," he told me after I correctly predicted which property a client would prefer. "You read people well. That cannot be taught." About a month into my new job, Uncle Frank handed me a small project to manage independently, a residential property that needed renovation before being listed for sale. I was responsible for coordinating with contractors, keeping the project on budget, and ensuring the work met our company's standards. I threw myself into the challenge, spending extra hours researching materials, negotiating with vendors, and learning about construction processes. When unexpected issues arose, as they inevitably did, I problem-solved creatively and kept the project moving forward. The satisfaction of seeing tangible progress each day was unlike anything I had experienced at my previous jobs. The day I earned my first commission check from the sale of that renovated property was a turning point. It was not a large sum, but it represented something profound, a validation of my abilities, and the beginning of financial independence on my own terms. That evening, I went shopping for professional clothes at a proper retail store instead of a thrift shop. I bought 3 well-made outfits that fit properly and made me look and feel like the professional I was becoming. Looking at myself in the dressing room mirror wearing a tailored blazer, I hardly recognized the confident woman staring back at me. As the weeks passed, my transformation extended beyond my wardrobe. I moved to a safer apartment with reliable hot water and functioning appliances. I paid extra on my student loans each month, watching the balance decrease with satisfaction. I started a savings account, something that would have been unthinkable just months before. Uncle Frank never mentioned my parents or Jake unless I brought them up first, a boundary I appreciated. When family did come up in conversation, he listened without judgment and offered perspective without pushing me in any particular direction. "Families are complicated," he said once when I shared a particularly painful memory. "We cannot choose our blood relations, but we can choose how much power we give them over our happiness." 3 months into my new career, I was having lunch with Uncle Frank at an upscale restaurant downtown when a familiar voice called my name. I looked up to see Jake standing by our table, looking as surprised as I felt. "Griselda, what are you doing here?" His gaze shifted to Uncle Frank, and his expression hardened. "Uncle Frank?" "Hello, Jake," Uncle Frank said cordially. "Would you like to join us?" Jake ignored the invitation, his attention fixed on me. "Since when are you two in contact, and why are you dressed like that? Last I heard you were waiting tables." I sat up straighter, drawing confidence from my new identity. "I work for Uncle Frank now. I am learning the real estate development business." Jake's expression cycled through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked remarkably like jealousy. "Does Dad know about this?" "My employment is not subject to our father's approval," I replied coolly. Jake's jaw tightened. "You know they do not talk to Uncle Frank. This will upset them." "That is their choice." I said with a calmness I did not entirely feel. After an awkward exchange of pleasantries, Jake left, but not before I saw him taking a phone call outside the restaurant, his gestures animated as he spoke. I knew what was coming and was not surprised when my phone rang that evening. My father's name flashed on the screen, a rare enough occurrence that it could only be about one thing. I answered, bracing myself for the confrontation. "Griselda, what is this Jake tells me about you working for Frank?" His voice was tight with anger. "It is true. I have been working for Uncle Frank for 3 months now. After everything he did to this family, how could you betray us like this?" The accusations stung, but I was no longer the desperate girl who would accept blame to keep the peace. "Uncle Frank has given me an opportunity that you and Mom never did. He believes in me and is teaching me a business that you apparently know nothing about since you had to steal his ideas." My father sputtered in outrage. "That is not what happened. Frank has obviously poisoned you against us. Uncle Frank barely mentions you. Unlike you and Mom, who cannot have a conversation without bringing up Jake's latest accomplishment. You have always been jealous of your brother," he accused. "No, Dad. I have always been overlooked in favor of my brother. There is a difference." The conversation devolved from there, ending with my father demanding I choose between my job with Uncle Frank and my place in the family. For the first time in my life, I stood my ground without wavering. "I choose my future," I said firmly before ending the call. When I told Uncle Frank about the confrontation the next day, he looked troubled but not surprised. "I am sorry to have caused a rift between you and your parents." "The rift was already there," I assured him. "This just brought it to the surface." He nodded thoughtfully. "Just remember that this is your decision. If at any point working with me becomes too complicated because of family dynamics, we can find another solution." But I had no intention of backing down. For the first time in my life, I was on a path that felt right with someone who supported me unconditionally. I was not going to let my parents' biases derail that. 6 months into my new career, I had settled into a rhythm. I was managing several projects independently, had earned the respect of our contractors and colleagues, and was building my own client relationships. Uncle Frank continued to mentor me, but increasingly treated me as a partner rather than a trainee. My confidence grew with each successful project. I developed a specialty in identifying undervalued properties in transitioning neighborhoods and creating renovation plans that maximized return on investment while respecting the character of the communities. A small write-up in a local business journal about one of my projects brought a surge of pride I had never experienced before. I had finally saved enough to move to a proper one-bedroom apartment in a nice neighborhood. My new home had hardwood floors, large windows that let in abundant natural light, and a small balcony where I cultivated potted herbs and flowers. For the first time since college, I invited friends over without embarrassment, hosting small dinner parties and enjoying the simple pleasure of creating a welcoming space. My relationship with my parents remained strained. Occasional text messages and stilted phone calls on holidays were the extent of our communication. I had made peace with this new normal, focusing instead on the positive relationships in my life, including my deepening bond with Uncle Frank, who had become the supportive family figure I had always craved. Then came the call that would test all the boundaries I had so carefully established. It was a Wednesday evening in early spring. I was reviewing plans for a new commercial property when my phone rang. Seeing my mother's name on the screen was unusual enough that I answered immediately, concerned something might be wrong. "Mom, is everything okay?" Her voice was thick with tears. "Griselda, I do not know what to do. We are in trouble. Serious trouble." I sat up straighter, setting aside my work. "What kind of trouble?" The story spilled out between sobs. Jake had convinced my parents to invest their retirement savings in a business venture, a specialty coffee shop and roastery. Despite having no experience in either retail or coffee, my parents had poured nearly $400,000 into the business, taking out a second mortgage on their home to fund it. "Jake said it was a sure thing," my mother explained. "He had business partners who knew the industry." The business had failed spectacularly within 6 months. The location was poor, the equipment expenses had been grossly underestimated, and Jake's experienced partners had vanished, along with a significant portion of the startup funds. Now my parents were facing possible foreclosure on their home and had no retirement savings left. "Where is Jake now?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "We do not know," my mother admitted. "He left a note saying he needed some time away to process everything. He has not answered our calls in 3 weeks." The irony was almost too perfect. Jake, who had been given every advantage, had failed and fled. Now my parents were turning to me, the child they had left to fend for herself, for help. My first instinct was to refuse to tell them they had made their bed and now had to lie in it. But beneath my anger and resentment, I still loved them. They were flawed, had treated me unfairly, but they were still my parents. "I will need to look at all the paperwork," I said finally. "The mortgage documents, the business loans, everything. I cannot promise anything, but I will see what can be done." My mother's relief was palpable. "Thank you, Griselda. I know we have not always been there for you the way we should have been." The acknowledgement, as small as it was, loosened something tight in my chest. The next day, I spoke with Uncle Frank about the situation, feeling conflicted about asking for his help with my parents' problems given the history between them. "They treated you terribly and they treated me no better," I said. "I would understand if you wanted no part of this." Uncle Frank considered for a moment before responding. "This is not about them, Griselda. This is about who you want to be. If helping them is important to you, then I will support that decision however I can." His generosity moved me deeply. "I do not even know if I can help them. Their financial situation sounds dire." "Let us look at it together," he suggested. "Between your business acumen and my experience in real estate, we might see options they have overlooked." We spent the weekend reviewing the documents my parents had sent over. The situation was indeed bleak. The coffee shop had been hemorrhaging money from day one, and Jake and his partners had taken on additional debt without my parents' knowledge, using the business as collateral. The second mortgage on their home had an adjustable rate that had recently increased, making their monthly payments untenable on their fixed income. "They cannot keep the house," Uncle Frank said bluntly after we had analyzed everything. "Not as things stand now, but we might be able to help them find a more affordable living situation and negotiate with the bank to avoid foreclosure." I nodded, having reached the same conclusion. "I will talk to them. It will not be easy for them to hear." "Would you like me to come with you?" Uncle Frank offered. The thought of facing this difficult conversation alone was daunting. "Would you really do that? After everything that happened between you and Dad?" "Like I said, this is about supporting you, not about the past." We arranged to meet my parents that weekend at their home. I had not been there in over a year, and driving up the familiar street brought back a flood of memories, not all of them pleasant. My parents looked older than I remembered, my father's hair now completely gray, my mother's face lined with worry. They greeted me with awkward hugs and looked at Uncle Frank with a mixture of surprise and discomfort. "Thank you for coming," my father said stiffly, clearly struggling with having to ask for help, especially with Uncle Frank present. We sat in the living room, the same room where I had watched Jake open extravagant gifts while I received practical necessities. Now it was filled with a heavy silence as I explained what Uncle Frank and I had discovered about their financial situation. "The bottom line is that you cannot afford to keep this house," I said gently but firmly. "The mortgage payments will only continue to increase, and with your current income, it is simply not sustainable." My mother began to cry quietly. My father looked shell-shocked. "But we have lived here for 30 years, he said weakly. "Where would we go?" "We have some options to discuss." Uncle Frank interjected, his tone professional but kind. "There are several approaches we could take." We outlined a plan that involved selling the house before foreclosure proceedings began, using the equity to pay off as much debt as possible, and moving into a smaller, more affordable condo. Uncle Frank offered to handle the sale personally to maximize their return and waive his commission. He also suggested a financial advisor who specialized in helping people rebuild after significant losses. "It will be a major adjustment," I acknowledged, "but it will give you a fresh start without the burden of debt hanging over you." My father was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I do not deserve your help. Either of you." He looked up first at me, then at Uncle Frank, especially after how I have treated you both. It was perhaps the first time I had ever heard my father admit he was wrong about anything. Frank, what happened with that development project? He continued. I took credit for your work. I was jealous of your success and saw an opportunity to advance myself at your expense. It was wrong, and I have regretted it for years. Uncle Frank's expression remained neutral, but I could see the impact of the words in his eyes. And Griselda. My father turned to me. We failed you as parents. We favored Jake, made excuses for him, gave him everything while expecting you to make your own way. We told ourselves it was because you were stronger, more capable, but the truth is we just found it easier to give in to Jake's demands. He was louder, more insistent, while you quietly excelled without complaining. My mother reached for my hand. We were so wrong, sweetheart. Seeing how successful you have become despite our lack of support makes me both proud and ashamed. The acknowledgement I had craved for so long landed differently than I had imagined. Instead of vindication, I felt a complex mixture of grief for what could have been and cautious hope for what might still be possible. I am willing to help you through this, I said carefully. But things need to change. We need to establish new boundaries and expectations. My parents nodded, seeming to understand that their relationship with me would never be the same innocent parent-child dynamic. We had moved into new territory that would require effort and honesty from all of us. Over the next several weeks, Uncle Frank and I helped my parents prepare their house for sale. It sold quickly for slightly above asking price, providing enough equity to pay off most of their debts. They moved into a 2-bedroom condo in a retirement community, a significant downsize, but one that was within their means. During this process, Jake finally resurfaced, calling my mother when he needed money. When she explained the family's financial situation and my role in helping them, he was initially dismissive. So now Griselda is some financial genius just because she works for Uncle Frank. He scoffed during a speakerphone call I happened to be present for. To my surprise, my father interrupted him. Your sister is helping us clean up a mess that you played a large part in creating. You would do well to show some humility and gratitude. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. It was perhaps the first time Jake had ever been held accountable by our parents. Eventually, Jake returned home, chastened by his business failure and the realization that our parents could no longer bail him out. He moved into the spare bedroom of their condo and in another first got a job at a local hardware store. My relationship with Uncle Frank continued to flourish both personally and professionally. Under his mentorship, I grew more confident in my abilities and began to develop my own vision for the kinds of projects I wanted to pursue. Nearly a year after that rainy night when I delivered pizza to Uncle Frank's store, I closed my first major independent deal, a small mixed-use development that would provide affordable housing units along with commercial space for local businesses. The project embodied my values and utilized all the skills I had been honing. With the commission from this project, I made a down payment on a small townhouse not far from Uncle Frank's neighborhood. The day I signed the closing documents and received the keys to my very own home, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. I am so proud of you, Uncle Frank told me as we celebrated with champagne on my empty living room floor, takeout containers spread between us. Not just for your professional success, but for the person you have become despite every obstacle. I raised my plastic cup in a toast to second chances and chosen family. 1 year after my unexpected reunion with Uncle Frank, my life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined while delivering pizzas in the rain. My career in real estate was flourishing with several successful projects under my belt and a growing reputation in the industry. My townhouse was fully furnished with pieces I had carefully selected to create a home that reflected my personality and taste. More significantly, the emotional wounds that had defined so much of my life were slowly healing. The journey had not been easy or straightforward, but with time and effort, I had found a path to forgiveness that did not require forgetting or excusing the past. My parents and I had established a new relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation. They had acknowledged their favoritism and were making genuine efforts to connect with me as the adult I had become. We met for dinner once a month, a tradition that had begun awkwardly, but had gradually evolved into something I actually looked forward to. My father and Uncle Frank had their own healing to do, a process that began during the crisis with my parents' finances, but continued through honest conversations about the past. They would never be as close as they once were, but they had found a way to be in the same room without tension, even occasionally sharing memories from their younger days. Jake's transformation was perhaps the most surprising. His business failure and our parents' inability to rescue him had forced him to confront realities he had been sheltered from his entire life. He struggled with the adjustment, initially cycling through blame, self-pity, and resentment. But when it became clear that no one would swoop in to fix his problems, he slowly began to change. He had been working at the hardware store for nearly 6 months now, longer than he had ever held any job. Recently, he had been promoted to assistant manager. It was a modest achievement by most standards, but for Jake it represented growth and maturity that had been long overdue. Our relationship remained complicated. Too much history existed between us for instant closeness, but we were finding ways to interact as adults. He had even asked me for legitimate financial advice, listening attentively as I explained basic budgeting principles that I had learned through necessity while he was being handed everything. On a warm Sunday in June, my parents hosted a small family dinner at their condo. Uncle Frank was there, as was Amanda, who had become like family to me. Jake arrived on time, something that would have been unheard of a year ago, bringing a homemade dessert he had learned to make from a coworker. As we sat around the table, I observed the scene with a sense of wonder. Here we were, this imperfect, once fractured family, sharing a meal together. The conversation flowed naturally, with everyone having space to speak and be heard. My mother asked thoughtful questions about my latest project. My father and Uncle Frank discussed a local development with mutual respect. Jake talked about his ideas for the hardware store's inventory system without dominating the conversation. In that moment, I realized that true healing does not mean erasing the scars, but learning to carry them with grace. The years of inequality and hurt had shaped me, making me resilient and determined in ways I might not have been otherwise. I would not choose that path for anyone, but I could acknowledge how it had forged my strength. Later that evening, as Uncle Frank and I walked together to our cars, he paused and turned to me. "Do you remember that night you delivered pizza to my door?" he asked. I laughed. How could I forget? I was soaking wet and mortified. I saw something in you that night beneath the exhaustion and circumstances, a fire that had not been extinguished despite every attempt to smother it. His words touched me deeply. I am glad you did. I am not sure I could see it myself at that point. That is often the way, he said wisely. Sometimes we need others to reflect back our light when we cannot see it ourselves. I thought about all the people who had reflected my light throughout my journey, from Mrs. Lawson in high school to Amanda in college, and now Uncle Frank. Even my parents, in their belated recognition of their mistakes, were finally seeing me clearly. The path forward would not always be smooth. Old patterns have a way of reasserting themselves, and healing is rarely linear. But I had learned that my worth was not determined by others' treatment of me, that I could create my own success through determination and hard work, and that forgiveness was a gift I gave myself more than anyone else. As I drive home to my own house, one that I had earned through my own efforts, I felt a profound sense of peace. The scared, exhausted young woman delivering pizzas in the rain had found her way to solid ground. She had not just survived, she had flourished. I hope my story resonates with those of you who have felt overlooked, undervalued, or forced to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Your worth is not defined by others' inability to see it. Keep moving forward even when the path seems impossibly difficult. You never know when your life might turn a corner, when an unexpected opportunity might arise, or when your hard work will finally be recognized. If you found value in my journey, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and transformation. Share in the comments if you have ever experienced family favoritism and how you handled it. Did you confront it or find your own path? Sometimes knowing we are not alone in our struggles is the first step toward healing. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful futures grow from the most challenging beginnings.